Well, welcome to tonight's On the Beat segment. Mike Griffith here. Really pleased to bring an old buddy of mine, certainly Atlanta Journal-Constitution, longtime writer, Dog Nation writer, Georgia beat writer, Chip Towers joins me tonight. Chip, really appreciate you joining the show. Good to visit with you. I mean, you and I get to visit every week, but we don't get to visit with each other on camera very often. So figure let's throw this thing together. Chip and I are going to dice and slice the Georgia Peach Bowl victory and then the future of Georgia football. So Chip, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Mike. I'm always glad to talk to you, whether it's on camera or on the old iPhone.
Yeah, or on the BlackBerry, as we did once in the day. You know, Chip and I go back to 1994. Chip was my Georgia guy when I had the SEC Sports Weekly magazine. We had to go out and get the best writers from every beat, and the best writer on the Georgia beat was Chip Towers, and here he is 26 years later, still getting it done and discussing Georgia football. And Chip, I guess I would ask you, you've seen a lot of Georgia bowl games. Where do you rank this? Has there been anyone quite like this that you can recall as far as comebacks and kind of pulling it all together in the end like they did in this victory?
You know, when I think actually not pulling out a victory like this, I just remember the most excruciating defeat I think I ever witnessed was Ray Goff's last game in the Peach Bowl, and Georgia comes, executes this incredible comeback and looks like they're going to win, but they have to kick off to Virginia, and Virginia returns to kickoff for a touchdown.
Oh.
Georgia lost, and it was just as bad as it gets. And, obviously this, so, just to backtrack a little bit, this was definitely, it was a great win. And I'm so happy for Jack Podlesny, J Pods, as we've come to know him. What a terrific story. What a great kick in a big situation. I mean, in a New Year's Six bowl, so the interesting thing is the Georgia people, as it were, the Dog Nation, they don't, easily say Peach Bowl and think great things, but this is a New Year's Six bowl. This is a top 10 team, and Georgia was in an absolute no-win situation. That's the bad thing about the whole matchup, is when you draw a group of five, and this is a very good group of five team, which I think all of us coming out of it can understand. That's a really good team with a really mobile quarterback, a salty defense, good special teams. I mean, that's a good team. And it's kind of a no-win situation for Georgia, because if you blow them out, they were a group of five. If you barely beat them like you were, you could barely beat a group of five. And if they beat you, man, I mean, you were going to hear about it for months. So, and that's what happened to Auburn and Florida State the last two times there were a group of five matchups in the Peach Bowl. So, all that said, I thought it was a great win. I mean, it was a great win on New Year's Day. The undercard to two semifinal games. Azeez Ojulari in his last game as a Bulldog, 3 sacks and a safety to end it. Richard LeCount getting in for the last play. I mean, I thought it was very, very positive, outcome and showing for Georgia. But, all that said, I mean, the way it is with the college football playoffs, I mean, that's where all the attention is right now. And it's, by the end of the night, nobody was talking about Georgia. And so it's up to Kirby. He built this monster. So, it's kind of like, don't let it eat you. You better go out there and, do better next year, because there is a slight regression, every year since the national championship game, like it or not, excuses or not. Say what you will. Everybody wasn't there for Florida, whatever. But that's where you are, and it needs to be better next year. And right now, I don't know whether it will be or not. I'm sure we'll get to this, but there's still a lot of ingress and egress, to work out before we know yet what this 2021 team is going to look like. And it's going to be good. They're not going to suck. They're going to be in the mix. There's no Kirby's got them there, but I mean, win it all? I don't know. I don't know whether this will be a year for that or not.
That's a great point, Chip. I hadn't thought about that, but you think about it. 2017, you played for it all. 2018, you're on the verge, but you win the SEC East. 2019, you really weren't on the verge of a playoff spot, but at least you win the East.
Yeah.
This year, you don't win the East. Now,
Yeah.
in the end, they're all there. It's you can say, well, it's 4 straight top 10 seasons, but to nth degrees, there has been some fall off. I think next year's the year you rebound and you beat Florida, obviously. And as you said, we have to wait and see who's coming, who's going. At the time of this, the time we're talking about this, and it can change with a tweet or a social media Instagram post. But as things stand, you got 7 guys that are going to the Senior Bowl, right? Malik Herring probably going. He hasn't. He hasn't made his. It seems like now the guys that are leaving have these special graphics made, like that's their official press release. Like that never used to happen, right? They used to.
I'm interested in finding out who makes the graphics, how that happens. Is it all sanctioned? I don't know. I mean, but yeah, I mean, it's we all now we wait for them to make their announcements. I like it better than it used to be, where we're burning up the phone lines trying to figure out what's going on. I mean, at least now it's kind of like, well, I guess we'll find out when they let us know. And Malik Herring's interesting, I mean, I wouldn't, he's a guy I wouldn't be surprised if he came back, I mean, he can, I don't know if he will, a Senior Bowl, you know this better than anybody. You've covered that event, I think, at least a dozen or so times. I've never covered it myself. But it's a big deal. I mean, it is a big deal to get an invite, and he may want to take advantage of that right now. I think he'd have an invite again next year, but you never know what's going to happen. And the odds are that he'll probably not be back. But that's just a bunch of names. I got lists all over the place, about what the scholarship count might look like. Right now, they're way over. Let me put it. They are way over. So there's going to be a lot of attrition in the next I mean, classes start on the 10th.
13th. They moved them back to the 13th.
They start. The team reports on the 10th. So, you better have your ducks in order by then, I would say.
Yeah, no doubt. So we're waiting to find out. We think JT Daniels is back. He hasn't announced. When he was asked about it on the teleconference, he said he hadn't given it thought. Reports from CBS was he was a first-round pick. I've seen other reports he'd be the 6th or 7th quarterback. Jordan Davis, to me, the big one out there, big nose tackle Jordan. I could see him coming back or going pro. I mean, could he go play in the pros? Sure. If he comes back, could he be a top 5 pick? I think he could. I think Jordan Davis is the kind of guy that could win the Outland Trophy, that could be a top 5 pick, because that guy has just gotten better and better and better. Tyson Campbell, the cornerback, a guy I think a lot of us thought early would go pro because he runs fast, straightforward. But to be honest, didn't have the greatest bowl game. Not a lockdown guy. I mean, Eric Stokes
didn't have the greatest season. Period.
Yeah, didn't have the greatest season.
It was okay, but it wasn't what you'd expect from a guy who might turn pro after his junior year.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to run a 4.35, if you show you can cover, then you're going to make a lot of money. You can run a 4.35, but if you can't cover, you're still going to go in the 3rd round. So decision for Tyson Campbell. Zamir White, this is an interesting one, because Zamir is a case, Chip, where it's not like he had such a great year he needs to go. It's a case of, are you really going to get any better, and are you going to get the same number of carries next year? I mean, Kendall Milton and Kenny McIntosh, they're going to take some of his work. James Cook, another one. Is he going to come back, or will he go pro? You wonder if the recent death of his father plays any role in this whatsoever. We know he's got an older brother, Dalvin, who's doing very well in the NFL, so you wouldn't think there's financial considerations here. Could just come down. So those 5 guys, JT Daniels, Jordan Davis, Tyson Campbell, Zamir White, James Cook, those are kind of guys. Now, potential transfer out. A lot of talk about Darnell Washington, the big tight end. You and I just talked about it before the show. Got a lot of work late, but there's a lot of other schools that are working on that guy. Guys who've already transferred out: Jermaine Johnson, Dwan Mathis, Notori Johnson, Trey Blunt. Of those 4, Chip, Jermaine Johnson, the main one. Were you surprised to see Jermaine Johnson not go pro, but transfer to Florida State after his senior year?
Yeah, I mean, I get it. He's and look, I don't want to go too far down into this, but he's got one of those fathers that is very headstrong, very opinionated about his son. There are some parents that they stay out of it and they let the coaches handle playing time and all that kind of stuff. He thinks his son should play more. I can see that argument. I mean, every time Jermaine Johnson was on the field, he impressed me. But also Dan Lanning in Georgia, firmly believes in keeping fresh people at the outside linebacker position because it requires such energy to play that position, to rush the passer. So they just rotate like crazy out there. I said they recruit like crazy at the outside linebacker position. And yes, so Jermaine at the end of the day, if he does in fact end up at Florida State and not in the NFL, with Ojulari turning pro, I mean, there would have been a ton of playing time for him this time. I mean, he probably would have been the featured guy like Ojulari this year. But, he didn't have the patience to stick it out and wait and see what was going to happen. So good luck at Florida State, I guess. I mean, he could possibly, maybe he got some promises down there. We'll keep you on the field every down, but you're not going to get that promise at Georgia. And maybe that'll help his draft position. I don't know. I haven't dug that deep into Jermaine Johnson's draft position, but that one did surprise me. That's a long way to say, yeah, that surprised me, Griff.
It is interesting, though, because you have, some guys want to go pro early because they don't want to risk injury. Here you got Jermaine Johnson. Here you got Jermaine Johnson, who I think has enough tape to go pro if he wants to. He actually wants more work, which will put him at more risk for injury at Florida State. Looking at the snap count this year, Chip, Azeez Ojulari had 300. This was prior to the bowl game. Azeez had 329 snaps. Jermaine Johnson was number 2 among those linebackers at 189. Nolan Smith 159. Adam Anderson 111. Robert Beal 29. So he did see the second most amount of snaps out of that outside linebacker group. But as you said, his father's made it clear that he wants his son to have more work. So, and then potential transfer in Eric Gilbert, the talented tight end from LSU. That's a Marietta kid. My indications are that he'll end up at Georgia, but who knows? But just think about how different this has become for college football, Chip. I mean, it was as simple as guys going pro or guys coming back. And you talk to them after the bowl game and go in the locker room and they tell you if they were leaving or going, or maybe you'd get a phone number and they'd call you out and say, call me in a week and I'll know. Now you got transfers in, transfers out, guys coming back, extra senior year, extra junior year, guys jumping into the transfer portal, guys coming in through the transfer portal, early signing period, late signing period. I think this is a great example of why college football needs a commissioner. You look at the NFL and there's windows, regimented windows for date, right? Free agent signing period, mini camp, draft, combine. College football, the whole doggone thing is murky year round, Chip. And it just seems like it lacks organization. I mean, is it just not possible to have a more defined calendar of chart for events?
Yeah, I mean, you touched on it there. It is chaotic. There's no other way to put it. And you'll never get me to really say that the amount of money these coaches make is justified, because it's crazy now. I mean, if you're an assistant of any kind of worth at all, I mean, you go from making 200 to 600 to 900 like that. I mean, it's crazy. And I realize there's a lot of money pouring in and it's a business and all that kind of stuff. But, I don't like it. I mean, I think it's too much, and I'm sure it's crazy to manage, especially from the position of a control freak like Kirby. I mean, he's trying to have he has his hand on every single lever. There are some coaches who give up parts of that. Mark Richt gave up many of those levers toward the end of his career and might have cost him as a result. Right now, Kirby, he's working them all, man. And that's tough. That's really, really hard. I do think there needs to be, I don't know whether the answer is a commissioner, the NCAA having some kind of jurisdiction, because they really don't. They've lost all of that at this point. I mean, it's almost a joke about the NCAA having any involvement whatsoever with college football. But it is too chaotic. It's crazy right now. And I can't imagine what it's like to be, not just a head coach, but, you got those positions now in the support staff. What is it? Director of player development. And you need those guys, because I know right now, I mean, they're sweating numbers over there. They're sweating bullets over numbers. It's like, how are we going to do this? How are we going to do this? There's conversations being made, parents being talked to. I mean, there's no way that it's calm and cool over there at this moment. I mean, you wish it could be, right, at the end of a season like we just had. I wouldn't blame any of those coaches for wanting to have an umbrella drink on a beach, for 3 days, right? But you can't right now. You're working it. You got to be, because the other guy is, and he's trying to beat you.
Yeah, and I felt the same way. I felt like the Kirby stress level was through the ceiling at the end of the year. It just seemed I mean, he's not usually one for fun and games anyway, but he really seemed uncharacteristically stressed out and combative almost at times. And it's like, hey, nobody here's the enemy, Kirby. I mean, you're playing Cincinnati. You ain't playing the Georgia beat media here, But the whole situation, to your point, it just seemed to bubble over the frustrations of whether guys are leaving, whether they're coming back. Not to mention the staff, Chip. A lot of talk about guys leaving the Georgia staff. There were 2 guys last year that didn't get a raise. I think both you and I both documented that Charlton Warren and Cortez Hankton did not get raises after last season. So that kind of makes you wonder, are these 2 guys that are going to be gone? You've heard speculation that Auburn could be trying to hire Del McGee. They've got a new coach in Brian Harsin from Boise State. It would seem to make a lot of sense to hire a former player who's had success recruiting at another school like McGee has had. We've heard rumors, maybe Dan Lanning, could it be his time to move on? Because as you said, Kirby is very controlling and this year was not perfect. There were issues in the Florida and Alabama game. And one can only imagine what those conversations were like between Kirby and Lanning after 564 and 571 yard games. So this was a stressful year. And, you said at the beginning of the show, here it is, 8-2, top 10 season, New Year's 6 bowl win. Out of 127 programs that played, 121 of them, 122 would trade places with Georgia in a heartbeat. But that monster, as you said, that Kirby's built, that level of expectation is such that people are looking at this year like, nah, whatever. And even worse, because you lost to Florida. What are your thoughts, Chip, now that we've seen these final round of bowl games? We got a national title game we'll talk about in a minute. What were some of your takeaways from some of the other SEC bowl games and finishes in the league?
Well, I mean, I thought, maybe with the exception of Florida, actually, I can't at this moment. Who's the other SEC team that lost?
Auburn lost to Northwestern.
That's it. Yeah, and Auburn, that was not a very good Auburn team at the end of the day. I mean, I was surprised they did as well as they did, and because that was not a good looking team, and I'm not surprised that they made changes over there. And touching on, you hit a lot of different marks right there. You talk about Del McGee and Auburn Auburn has never stopped trying to hire Del McGee. That's why you've seen his pages go right through the roof, and it makes sense. I mean, he's a letterman from Auburn. He recruits this area. He recruits that area. He's been terrific for Georgia. I mean, fantastic in terms of, especially in the recruiting game. I mean, what the running backs do, I can't, really comment on it in terms of how good of a job a running backs coach ever does. Really, hang on to the ball, right, and
protect.
Run to daylight. But not to belittle that. I mean, I know there's a lot to it, but I mean, he's just fantastic recruit. And look, it's just a matter of time on Del McGee, whether it's Auburn or somewhere else. I hope because there's just an absolute dearth of African American, Black, whatever you want to call it, coaches in the game. There needs to be many, many more, because if you look on the field at the makeup of the rosters, these guys can get the job done. I'm convinced they just need opportunities, and there's not enough of them. But all that said, I know Kirby and I know Georgia fans want to keep Del McGee, and I don't blame you. And, I hope you do. I like Dale personally. I mean, he's a great guy. He's a wonderful human being. But that's what you're up against when you're talking about this. I mean, everybody, every year, it is such a dog-eat-dog game out there right now. College football, it is vicious. Think about LSU and what's going on out there. I mean, they just won a national championship the year before last, and then it's like there's blood in the water over there, man. And Auburn, chain, Tennessee, they're grousing. They're ticked off, man. And even Florida, you're sitting there beating a drum about the greatest year since I don't know whenever. What are they? 4 losses at the end of the day. I mean, it's like the greatest offense you've ever put together in history. And that one just fell off a cliff at the end. And so it's tough. And I can't remember what your original question was, but there's a lot to tackle for all these guys.
Well, that was it. Just SEC impressions. Hard to believe, Chip. Kirby's only 45 years old. Probably seems like yesterday for you that you were covering him as a player. I remember coming in here covering Tennessee in '98, and they beat Quincy Carter and a Kirby Smart team in '99 as well, back when Georgia actually was owned by the state of Tennessee. Philip Fulmer won something like 7 or 8 in a row until Mark Richt got here and really upset the Tennessee apple cart and really put Georgia, a lot of people felt like, on the verge. The statistic that gets thrown out there, and I know you probably roll your eyes just like I do, but Mark Richt's first 5 years, Kirby's first 5 years, they got the same number of wins. I think Kirby's got 1 more loss. I look at it as from 10,000 feet and say, but this isn't the same Georgia. Your facilities, your stadium upgrades, while the record may be the same, I see the infrastructure around Kirby Smart improving. Whereas with Mark Richt, I didn't think that happened. You probably have a better comparison of the first 5 of Mark versus the first 5 of Kirby. What are your thoughts on that comparison?
Well, I mean, I was around for it, and perhaps that has a lot to do with it. I also have a lot of personal admiration of Mark Richt. I'm a Christian and I'm a believer, and I love the way
a lot of people do.
Right?
Chip.
And so to do that in this world that we're describing, I think is pretty amazing. And what he did at the beginning, you have to have the perspective, which I obviously do, of the long-suffering Georgia fan. It was a completely different Georgia program that Kirby Smart inherited, the one that Mark Richt inherited. And so for him to have done what he did, when everybody cites those numbers, Mark Richt versus Kirby Smart, his numbers might even be more amazing when you think about it, because Kirby has just done what Mark did, but he's done it with a lot more cachet, much more. And, so it's kind of the chicken and the egg thing. Did Kirby didn't go earn that indoor practice facility or even the West End. Heck, the West End was Mark Richt's idea. He just he didn't last to see it come to fruition. And he's okay with that. And everybody's okay with that. And that's not a strike against Kirby. I mean, that's not, he came in and listen, he is a businessman at the end of the day, Kirby. And he, held off. He was a great defensive coordinator and recruiter for Alabama for a long time. And he held off until he could get the right situation. He knew exactly what he wanted. So he gets credit for that. And he knew what to do with all this. And he asked for assurances up front when it comes to recruiting budget and the way they did things. And we're going to be top notch every step of the way and all that kind of stuff. So I don't begrudge him any of that. But, I also wouldn't want the pressure that he's probably feeling right about now. Like all that was great early on. But now it's getting to the point that it's only this very tippy top that matters. None of that other stuff matters. There's a lot of cliches about it even before the money and the expectations were what they were in college, what they are now in college football. But basically, you lose 10% of the fan approval base every year that you're at an institution. So that means by 10 years, you got 0% fan approval generally, right? I mean, ask Mark Richt about that, the diminishing returns in terms of the grace that you're given. The grace quotient, diminishes all the time. And the grace is going down for Kirby. That said, I mean, man, I look at this roster and there's great talent there all over the place. And I still think it's the craziest thing because you've covered other programs and I've been aware of other programs. I've covered the SEC for a long time. It's been done at these other places. It's just dumbfounding that Georgia hasn't been able to do it. Just dumbfounding. They've been right there, so close, so many times, but there's always something, 2nd and 26, whatever.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know why, but that's what it is. But it's not because of anything Georgia's done, unless, somebody, sacrificed some chickens or something for that 1980 championship and they're paying for it now. I don't know what it is, but he has them in position to, not just get to the promised land, but to cash in. And 2021 will be just as good of a chance as I think Georgia's right there. Even this past year, the circumstances of between opt-outs and pandemics and injury situations are so important as to when they come. Man, you go back and Alabama's Alabama. Alabama's what they are this year. But Florida, man, that was really a perfect storm of guys being out that particular week, and a certain quarterback not being in yet. The just combination of factors, you weren't able to take care of a team that at the end of the day, I think you're better than.
No, I don't think there's any question Georgia's better than Florida at the end of the day. And you're right. You wonder, the what if there wasn't maybe Jamin Newman gets a spring term, gets that practice, and he gets comfortable as the starter, and he's the guy. And there is no question about transfer or next guy up or next. I mean, you went through Dwan Mathis, Stetson Bennett, Jamie Newman. I mean, the quarterback situation was a fiasco. And let me say this, Stetson came in and threw a nice 12-yard strike in that bowl game. He did about as well as he could do. But you can't realistically ask a former four-string walk-on to go into Tuscaloosa and beat Alabama. And yet at halftime, Georgia was up 24-20. So you talk, and you were right there on the doorstep right then and there. So that's pretty interesting, if you ask me, Chip. I think that's a good summation of that postseason, and really, just looking across the SEC and looking at Georgia. So. I guess I don't want to take up any more of your day. I know people can still read you at ajc.com. And what's your Twitter handle?
C Towers AJC.
C Towers AJC. You and I will continue this discussion. I'm going to have you on more of these on the beats during this off season. We could have had a chapter 2, 3, and 4. I could have gone a whole hour with you, and I might have. But I said to myself, nope, I'm going to keep it confined. So the next time I ask Chip, he'll come back on and say, instead of saying, Griff kept me on an hour when he told me it was only going to be 25. I see all them books behind you got to read. And I know you've got a lot of stories to do as well as I do. So, Chip, thanks for joining me on the Beat. Second half of the show, I'm going to bring up Cole Cubelic. But right now, I want to take a moment for our sponsors at Ingles.
It's in our hearts to feel for real. There's been ups and downs, turnarounds, good days and some bad. But we stand together for worse and for better. We'll always have your back. With open arms, heart to heart, hand in hand. Community strong.
Welcome back. As promised, Cole Cubelic, ESPN reporter, analyst, SEC Network. Cole, what did I read? 19 stadiums for you this year, something like that?
You know what? I probably should have altered that because I did have a few repeat stadiums, but I just meant being in a college football stadium 19 out of 20 weeks. So wow. I was thankful, privileged, honored, fortunate for that to happen. I'm very appreciative of every player, every coach, every team personnel, individual, the medical staff, training staffs. I mean, they all help make this happen. And as you very well know, Mike, it was a very short time ago that not many people thought that we would get 4 games in, much less 400 something games in. So pretty exciting.
Well, your work with Tom Hart and Jordan Rogers, very much appreciated. That was an excellent broadcasting team, and you guys will be moving up that chain in no time at all. We'll be seeing you on Monday Night Football, maybe. I don't even know if that's the top. I think doing SEC is fun. Let's talk about Georgia. Let's talk a little bit about the Peach Bowl, Cole. I mean, Cincinnati proved to be more of a challenge than I certainly expected. I think more than Georgia expected, too, when I look at – let's start up front, the offensive line. Of course, you're associated, the chairman of the Joe Moore Offensive Line Award. I believe this is the first time that Georgia hasn't been at least one of the semifinalists, one of the top 10 or 11 this year's offensive line. Kind of give me your takeaway from 10,000 feet on the Georgia offensive line this season, and then dial it in with what happened against Cincinnati, in your opinion.
Yeah, I think inconsistent would be a fair way to describe a lot of the season. Now, there were stretches when they were very consistent and very dominant. I think you look at that last third of the season, and there was a lot of bully ball. I mean, that game against South Carolina was, if you like offensive line play, that was fun to watch. Now, you'll get some fans of the opposing team that are crying about who was in the game, in which there was never one point in my life, Mike, when I put a helmet on and buckled my chin strap and felt sorry for the guy across from me and didn't go hard as hell and try to knock him on his ass. So I don't know, all of a sudden we're supposed to feel sorry for people because they don't have a scholarship or they weren't a first or second team player, but apparently that's how it works these days. But I think COVID had a lot to do with it. I'll be honest, from my perspective, and most of the other offensive line guys that I talked to before the season, we did not anticipate seeing a lot of great offensive line play. With no spring ball, limited weight room access, the amount of time that you spent together in the offseason was just going to be limited. I think that hurts a group. And then just a weird fall and a weird fall practice, that's a group that needs continuity. You need chemistry. And when you're facing times that are constantly pulling at that, it's difficult to find it. And there were long stretches in which Georgia was one of the best offensive lines in the country. I think injuries played a big part. Obviously, losing Trey late. He's a leader. He's a guy that understands the calls. And he's a good football player. He's pretty physical at the point of attack. He's athletic. I think when you fast forward to the bowl game, obviously you have Ben step out, and he was a guy that's been a mainstay in that offensive line for a couple of years, not to mention the gigantic physical presence. And then you have to start playing chess. And I think one thing about these bowls, Mike, that no one really talks about or considers is how compressed everything was. Think about, we usually go SEC championship game, and then we have like 3 weeks or 18 days, or if you're playing a title game or semifinal, maybe even longer than that. Well, now all of a sudden it was like season ends, maybe you get 4 or 5 days off, and then boom, you're getting ready for a bowl game. So there wasn't that go home and sit around and figure things out. I mean, it was rapid fire, and that included transfers, injuries, guys going to the NFL, COVID situations. I mean, they all happened fast. So all of a sudden, Matt Luke has to start playing chess of, well, should we just go ahead and try this guy here? Should we move this guy over here? What's our best option here? And then on top of that, you have that old school bowl mentality of, well, can we get reps for the guy next season? Can we begin to get this guy ready for next season? Bowl practice is usually an alternate training ground for what's coming next. I can remember even when I was playing, we would have our regular 18, 15 period practice, and then usually we would go 20, 24, but then the rest would be, all right, young guys, over to field 3, we're about to scrimmage. And that's still commonplace these days. Well, you didn't have that. So now, are you going to try to use some first or second team reps on a guy that maybe you know you're going to need next year? Maybe even game reps on a guy that you know you're going to need next year. So it was a tough situation for them. That Cincinnati defense does a lot with their pressure packages. They move around a lot. And I think that's one of the reasons they were able to cause some problems. The line play was I wouldn't say it was great in that game. I thought they had maybe a little bit of a below average game. Pass protection really struggled. Now, that wasn't all on the offensive line. There were some tight end breakdowns. There were some running back breakdowns. I thought there were some protections that either the quarterback or the center or the coaching staff could have worked differently to be able to help. But I think physically where you really saw the big difference was on the other side of the ball. I mean, that was an ass kicking when Georgia's defense was on the field. And for anybody who tried to convince me that this Cincinnati offensive line could run through a Power 5 schedule and do the same things that they did in their conference, I think that was probably all you needed to see, because whether it was 13, whether it was 99 or 17, a lot of those guys made big plays and did big things and physically dominated at the point of attack in that game.
Yeah, they really did. 8 sacks for Georgia, and they kept the Cincinnati run game in check. There was one bust, second play of the second half. Somebody missed a gap. You know, again, that's where missing a guy like Monty Rice, your 3-year starter at the mic, that play doesn't happen if Monty Rice is in there. And it doesn't happen if Lewis Seen, who missed the tackle, had been going through bowl practices, but he's removed because of COVID protocol. So he's sloppy. He's out of form. Monty Rice isn't there, so they're out of their alignment. and boom, 79-yard play, and suddenly it's 21-10, and it's a completely different game plan for Georgia in terms of their sense of urgency, and conversely, how that allowed the Cincinnati defense to play. And Cole, I think Luke Fickell, I think this guy, and I know he took some criticism for snapping the ball too quickly late. Look, he was playing to win. There was a very aggressive mindset. Cincinnati was playing with no fear. I think that sends a message to your team and your quarterback when you're not milking the clock, because I think that can lend itself to a very passive mentality. But I like Luke Fickell, Cole. I'm surprised, and maybe we shouldn't write it off yet. Why not Luke Fickell for Tennessee if there's going to be a coaching change eventually? I mean, he strikes me as a guy that's going to get one of these major Power 5 jobs soon.
No, I think he brings the leadership that you would need, obviously a tough mentality, and I think the organizational skills that go along with that leadership, whether that means how you're putting your responsibility on your other coaches, what you're allowing them to do, the time that you spend with your players, and how you spend your time around your players, around your team. He seems to get all of that, and he seems to get more out of a little bit less from his football team. So he's going to be in the mix for a lot of big jobs, and that's not just this year. That's going to be for the next few years, I believe.
Yeah, Marcus Freeman, defensive coordinator, getting a lot of interest right now from LSU. We've heard Derek Mason's name involved. Cole, you've had a chance to kind of dance around at the different bowl games. Give me some of your highlights, the surprises from the bowl season as it was. I know it was a somewhat unique. Ole Miss, I suppose, beating Indiana. To me, that was, I picked that, but I wasn't necessarily shocked by that. Auburn, Northwestern, conversely, kind of surprised. Just kind of some of your impressions.
Yeah, I think with Ole Miss, I was a little surprised because you didn't have Jerry on Ely, you didn't have Elijah Moore, you didn't have Kenny Yeboah. That was 80% of their receiving yards from the season were gone in that game. So for them to be able, their defense played well. And I was really surprised that Tom Allen didn't come out and say, we might not throw the ball. We're going to try to run it down your throat. We think you can. They got it going a little bit late, and they got a big physical running back, and they didn't really commit to it until later in the game. And I think that kind of hurt them because that allowed Matt Corral to be able to get some things going. And then I thought it was pretty cool at the end. John Rice Plumlee, 1,000 yards, led the SEC in rushing yards last year, hadn't done much this year. They hit him 3 times. He shows confidence in a certain kid. Hit him 3 times on the final drive to be able to go up there for Ole Miss. I thought that was a pretty cool moment. You mentioned Auburn, disappointing. And you hate it for Kevin Steele because he's in a bad spot there. He knows he's not going to be retained, and he's trying to motivate a team. There's all this social media stuff swirling about him, a lot of which that I just don't think is true. And then you got a couple guys that are checking out. Anthony Schwartz decides not to play, and you don't have your best tailback who he was not opting out, but was not able to go in that football game. And what do you go from that point? And I think we saw Bo Nix revert back to being that sporadic sort of manic quarterback, kind of plays the position like a linebacker, and that's not always advantageous. And once Northwestern got a little momentum late, it was over for Auburn. I think the Big 12 has been really impressive. It sounds kind of weird, but you knock off number 8, Oak State takes out number 18, Miami. Texas beats Colorado, who was probably the 3rd best team in the Pac-12. Florida gets smashed by Oklahoma, which you can talk about the guys that were out, and that did make a difference, but still Oklahoma was convincing in that game. And then West Virginia beats a 9-win Army team. That's a really good Army team that West Virginia was able to take out. So, and then obviously you had Iowa State take out Oregon. And so I thought that was a really impressive run from the Big 12. Coming back into the SEC, obviously the Mississippi State situation was ugly after that game. That's not anything that we want to see, that we should see, that anybody should be happy about. And then, of course, Alabama just straight dominant again. I mean, what else can you say other than they consistently come out and handle their business in dominant fashion?
Yeah, I'm always impressed with Alabama. This season in particular, and I can understand why, they've got so many of the awards that are coming. I was glad to see Nick Saban. I was petitioning for that on the 3-man front show in Birmingham all year. It's just become so much of who had a bad team that did the best. And I just felt like this year with Coach Saban in particular, going through COVID-19, that he deserved the accolades. I know Georgia fans are going, wait a minute, this is a Georgia show. Why are you talking about it? And I get it. I just feel like when you're Georgia now, and you're a program that is on the verge of being the SEC champion, suddenly the rest of the conference becomes very interesting as you look around the league for challengers. And when I look at Georgia, Cole, coming back with, JT Daniels and perhaps Jordan Davis, those two players there, and neither one has made any formal announcements. Now,
Right.
JT teased a picture earlier, but that's not a formal announcement. There'll be a formal announcement later in the week, I'm sure. Same with Jordan Davis. How important are those two guys in your mind to Georgia's championship hopes? And where do you kind of have Georgia in your way too early SEC look for next season?
I'll say this quickly about this. This is a very difficult topic because you still have guys who can leave and go to the NFL. You mentioned a few there. We have guys every day that are announcing they're going into the portal and they're transferring out. You have guys who can transfer in from the portal, obviously. But the kicker this year, Mike, is all these seniors that can come back. And we just don't know who might have an opportunity to play another year that's going to take that and be back for some of these teams, and maybe could be big contributors. We don't really know. Like Sam Ehlinger was a guy that I thought would come back to Texas because I don't think he's going to make an NFL roster for very long. And I thought he could have really built up some equity at one of the biggest brands in college football. And who knows how much money that's going to make him the rest of his life. But I think we have to wait and see what these rosters are going to look like to see if there is going to be a real contender to Alabama. I have learned my lesson way too many times about a coach leaving, a player leaving, a group of players leaving to automatically think that things are going to be very different in Tuscaloosa. And I've seen enough of Bryce Young to know that looks like he's going to be pretty good. You got Mechie at wide receiver, who is going to lead that group. Billingsley at tight end has really started to come on this year. He's going to be back in that group. They got 3-4 tailbacks that they can choose from that are going to be fine at that position. I think defensively would probably be where it's really interesting because it's where I think, I've talked about Georgia all this year as I've never seen a bigger collection of edge defenders on one team that were all really good, even though they did different things in different ways, but had that many guys that could just sit out there and help your football team win. This Alabama team could be hit by more departures on defense. And the thing about Alabama is we had always seen glimpses of the next guys, especially up front. And last year, I said that going into this year, that we saw a little bit of Christian Barmore, but I hadn't seen the next guy. Well, now Christian Barmore might leave, and I still hadn't seen any of the next guys. So I think the Alabama front could really be in trouble next year. Now, I think the secondary is still going to be really good. They've recruited guys that still could show up and be amazing. But that's the part that I would be a little bit concerned about going into next season. I think losing a couple offensive linemen with the skill that they're going to have at running back, receiver, quarterback, and depending on who the new offensive coordinator is, especially if they can find a way to build in the quarterback run game, I wouldn't anticipate a gigantic fall off, but I would have Georgia as that number one contender right now.
Yeah, I think so. I look at what JT did. He had 3 of his 4 starts. He passed over 290 yards, Cole. And, in the previous 43 games, Georgia only had 1 game where they had thrown over for 290 yards with Jake Fromm. So we're seeing a bit of an evolution, finally, of the Georgia offense. You know about George Pickens. And, of course, Jermaine Burton showed up this year as a young talent. And now the tight end.
Look at Washington in that bowl game. I mean, he looked fantastic. So yeah. I think now maybe he's gotten through some of the conditioning stuff, and he's a guy that's ready to be more of an every down player. You can build some things around him. Running backs, no question. I mean, just take a pick. You got 3-4 guys that I think are going to be fine back there. So, and then if you have, I think what could be really important for Georgia that Alabama won't have would be that staff continuity. If you bring most guys back on offense, if Monken is back, along with Coach Luke, now that's a pretty big core of what you're doing offensively that going through a weird offseason trying to figure it out last year, you could be really comfortable with heading into 2021.
What does a guy like Eric Gilbert do? I don't know. I'm sure at some point you did LSU once or twice probably, but if you were to plug, and he's out there right now in the portal, and a lot of strong reports coming from Athens here. And, I've been very aggressive saying I do believe Georgia's going to get him. If Georgia gets a guy like Eric Gilbert and pairs him with Darnell Washington, tell me what that does to a defense and why we see so many NFL offenses and successful offenses that run this ace set with a guy like Darnell and then a guy like Gilbert, who appears to be a little bit more of a flex. You could probably explain that.
Yeah, Gilbert's a guy that you can put out in the slot, maybe even put out wide, and he's going to find a way to win at times. he is a special tight end talent and someone who really changes the way the defenses have to play you, because how do you identify him? Number one, if you identify him as a tight end, you play him big and you flex him out, all of a sudden you're in trouble. There's your mismatch. And this is what Mullen's been doing with Kyle Pitts the entire season. Basically seeing how people have identified he and Kadarius Toney and then being able to go find the mismatch on them. So I think Eric Gilbert would give you a lot of that. Now, and he's a very similar to Darnell. One thing that was surprising about him as a freshman this year, he's a very willing blocker and actually improved throughout the course of the football that he did play this year. So I think that's an area that you kind of have to watch with him too. Both those guys is that usually you get these freshmen tight end, especially these physical specimens, and they just want to run around and catch balls. Those two guys were both at least willing to put their hand on the ground, go out there and try to be physical blockers, attack, and really seemingly not have any issue with it, and then get better as the season went on. So he's a special kid, Mike. There's no doubt. I would caution people with where he is right now and just say, temper your expectations for he's going to need some time to figure some things out. And I hope that whoever does try to bring him in understands that and knows that. And I wish him the best. I hope the kid has an amazing college football career, but there are things that need to be handled in the appropriate manner. And I hope that takes place and somebody's not just trying to fast forward football on it.
Yeah, well, we've seen it happen, Cole, nowadays, and we talked about a little bit earlier on the three-man front show in Birmingham. There's just so much going on. I just can't imagine being a head coach right now. If Kirby Smart could clone himself 2 or 3 times, he would. I mean, you've got the juniors and the seniors that could be leaving. You got potential transfers out, potential transfers in. Seniors, do they flex for another year of eligibility or not? Coaching staff changes. There's always a trickle-down effect. If you look at the Georgia staff, there's been some reports that maybe Dan Lanning could be a guy that could be hired away. There's been some reports that Auburn has had interest in Dell, former player and Georgia running back coach. What are your thoughts about this Georgia staff and who would be some of the guys that could be attractive candidates to the outside SEC or other teams?
I mean, I think Dale McGee is going to be a guy that you're gonna have that conversation with almost every year, just because of the kind of recruiter he is and his resume, where he's been, what he's been around, the experience that he brings. I think Dan Lanning's a star. I think he absolutely is head coaching material. I think the great benefit for Georgia there is he is a D coordinator for a guy who was the D coordinator for a guy that probably helped assist him to get to where he is today, and has that understanding of, yes, people know what you're going to be now. People already see the writing on the wall that you're going to be very successful and you can be a head coach one day, but look how long I waited and look how patient I was and look where it got me. And I think they probably have at times, or will have, those conversations. But Dan is very energetic, very charismatic, somebody that's fun to be around. The players obviously love playing for him. They play hard for him. I think he comes up with creative ways to get players to play and do different things, maybe that they don't like, but it helps their football team. So he's a very valuable resource for what Kirby Smart does.
This was year 5 of Kirby, and believe it or not, Cole, he's already the 3rd longest tenured coach in the SEC behind Nick Saban and Stoops up at Kentucky. I mean, the changes are just incredible how often teams are changing coaches now. When you look at what Kirby Smart's done in 5 years, what direction is the arrow pointing? I mean, because on paper, you go from a national title appearance in 17 to the verge of the playoffs and an SEC East title in 18. 19, you won the East again, but not quite on the verge of a playoff. And then this last year, Florida slid by. Is there any reason to panic, or do you think Georgia's arrow is going to be pointing up and they'll be back on top in the East next season?
I mean, I think reason to panic is pretty funny. Anybody who would say that, I would say just kind of maybe you need to go back to the drawing board with your expectations. The goal is to get a national championship. I get that. I know that. And I think Kirby does as much or more than any other head coach in the league to try to accomplish that. The problem is there's going to be a lot of other good teams in the league every year. And usually the best team in the nation, at least for the last decade plus, has also been in the league. And you got another team that got hot and went on a hell of a run that was in your division this year. But I do think that the sustainability of being close or being in or being discussed as being in That's what you want. That's what I look for first, because you take Auburn for an example, and you got the head coach in college football that's had the most success against Nick Saban just got fired. He just got run. I mean, we can't debate that. Like, people can debate whether it's a good move, bad move. You cannot debate that Gus has been more successful against Nick than any coach in college football, and that includes Hugh Freeze. And Hugh, Dabo, and Ed are the only ones that have a win against him in college football right now. And what got him gone were the ebbs and flows, the ups and downs, the peaks and valleys, the inconsistency. Now, has there been an ugly loss or two along the way? Yeah, you point to South Carolina and you say, the hell happened there? Like, how did that happen? But I think the consistency of being in the discussion for the division, for the conference, for the playoff, for the national championship, that has not gone away. Now, you just so happen to play Alabama early this year, which may have removed them from a lot of that discussion for a couple of weeks, but then you're right back in it until you play Florida. So I don't think that anyone should have any concern, any hesitation as to what Kirby is doing or is going to do. And I asked the age-old question of, who are you going to go get that's going to do better?
I'm with you. I don't think anybody could do better at Georgia. Before I let you go, Cole, I want to ask you, I want to dial in a little bit on this line a little bit more. I want you to tell me your observations of Jamari Salyer, of Warren Erickson, and Warren McClendon. Of course, Jamari was at left tackle. He's going to move inside to guard. Erickson was the replacement for Trey Hill, and Warren McClendon was the redshirt freshman that started at right tackle throughout the year.
I was pleased with Erickson in the bowl game. I really was. I don't think he's nearly as physically gifted as some of the other guys that you mentioned and that we would have talked about the last few years on the Georgia offensive line. Do I think he's physically has the tools that a Ben Cleveland does? No, probably not. Not even a Trey Hill. But the technique was there. The fundamentals were there. You didn't see him lose much. Jamari, I think, is out of place at tackle. I think that's apparent. We've seen him sort of flirt with that a few times. I think he's much better suited at guard. He's got heavy hands. I think body control is something that needs a little bit of work there. And if he can continue to sort of figure that part of it out, I do think he could be a really good player in this league. I think he's somebody who, when he gets his hands on you, when he gets engaged and he gets locked on, he's going to be able to move you. And that you don't coach that kind of power. Like, I didn't have that. And I was the strongest player on our team, but I just didn't have the God-given ability to move people. Like, my strength was different. He has the opposite strength of what I had, and that is when he gets engaged with someone, he can move you, he can push you off the ball. And I think that's going to be needed inside, because now you're looking at 2-3 consecutive years of losing quality interior offensive linemen. So you better have the next guys ready to tee up. And I think knowing that you're going to be able to move him down inside will be a big benefit for Matt moving forward.
Going to be good stuff. Cole, can't thank you enough for joining us again. Great work with the SEC Network, ESPN, your sideline work, your commentary, rising star in the business, man. Always enjoy watching and listening to you and following you on Twitter. So you and I will be talking a lot more this offseason.
I appreciate it, Mike. It's always good to catch up with you.
Great stuff. That was Cole Cubelic, and that's the On the Beat Show. Thanks so much for joining us. Thank you to Ingles, our sponsor. We'll be back next week here on the On the Beat Show.